It had been several years since humanity joined the United Federation of Planets, and things had finally started to settle down. Well, settle might be a generous term. The underlying tensions remained, but at least the immediate crises had subsided. The Federation, always seeking to fill the lulls between catastrophes with bureaucratic initiatives, had launched its newest endeavor, the Enhanced Cross-Cultural Understanding Initiative. The pompous title masked what was essentially an attempt to prevent future misunderstandings by actually getting to know each other beyond formal diplomatic exchanges. Chancellor Zorp, the Federation's long-suffering administrator, had approved the initiative with his characteristic mix of resignation and pragmatism. If it keeps them busy until the next disaster, so be it, he had muttered to his aide while signing the authorization. The Federation Council, eager to demonstrate their commitment to inclusivity, had unanimously voted to establish the Committee for Cultural Integration and Exchange, CICI, appointing an enthusiastic young Benzite diplomat named Jylan as its chairperson. Jylan was the perfect choice for such a committee, idealistic to a fault, endlessly optimistic, and utterly convinced that cultural harmony was just one meaningful exchange away. Unlike many of his more cynical colleagues, Jylan genuinely believed that the key to true integration wasn't merely observing other cultures from a safe distance, but actively participating in them. "We've been studying humans for years," Jylan declared during the committee's inaugural meeting, his respiratory attachment glowing with excitement. "But have we truly experienced humanity? Have we lived their customs rather than just read about them?" The assembled representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Most of them had been quite content with the status quo of cautious observation. "The humans provided us with their starter kit when they joined," Jylan continued, pulling up holographic files. "But we've only processed this as data. We haven't engaged with it as experience." The Humanity Starter Kit had been Earth's contribution to the Federation archives upon joining, a comprehensive, if somewhat haphazardly compiled, collection of human history, culture, arts, sciences, and customs. Most Federation species had contributed similar archives, though humans stood out for its extraordinary size and contradictory contents. "I propose," Jylan announced with flourish, "that we revisit this starter kit and extract elements of human culture that we can actually participate in together, safely, of course. We'll organize a week-long interspecies recreational exchange festival where Federation members can experience human customs firsthand." The committee members exchanged wary glances. A Vulcan representative raised an eyebrow, which for a Vulcan was equivalent to a loud protest. "Perhaps," the Vulcan suggested, "we might focus on the most logical aspects of human culture, their mathematical systems or scientific methodologies." Jylan waved dismissively. "That's exactly the kind of cold, distant approach we're trying to move beyond. Science and math are universal. We need to engage with what makes humans uniquely human. Their propensity for violence and conquest," a Tellarite grumbled. "Their illogical economic systems," offered the Vulcan. "Their bizarre mating rituals," an Andorian diplomat suggested with a slight antenna twitch. Jylan's enthusiasm dimmed momentarily. No, something more accessible. Something that showcases human creativity and cooperation without the problematic elements." The committee spent weeks combing through the Humanities Starter Kit, carefully avoiding sections labeled politics, economic systems, religion, history of warfare, and the particularly concerning internet culture. Instead, they focused on the seemingly innocuous recreation category, seeking activities that appeared safe, universally accessible, and representative of human social bonding. After eliminating obviously dangerous pastimes like skydiving, cliff skiing, and something called extreme ironing, the committee settled on a list of apparently harmless human recreational activities. Board games, specifically Monopoly and Scrabble. Team sports, volleyball and badminton seemed the least violent. Handicrafts, knitting and pottery. Music, focusing on marching bands and community choirs. These activities, Jylan announced proudly at the presentation to the Federation Council, represent the cooperative, creative spirit of humanity without any of the concerning elements that have caused apprehension among our members. They're accessible, adaptable for different physiologies, and promote social bonding across species boundaries. Chancellor Zorp, looking over the proposal with weary eyes, authorized the initiative with one condition. Extremely stringent safety measures must be in place at all times. What Zorp didn't say, but everyone understood, was that he expected things to go wrong. Things always went wrong when it came to humans. The only questions were how wrong and how quickly. The answer, as it turned out, was catastrophically and almost immediately. The first event in the Interspecies Recreational Exchange Festival was the Interstellar Monopoly Tournament, held in a spacious conference hall on Starbase 47. Representatives from 12 different species arrived, were divided into mixed species groups of 4, and seated at elegant tables with specially made, oversized Monopoly boards. The rules have been carefully translated into all Federation languages, with cultural explanations provided for concepts like rent, jail, and property ownership, which didn't exist or had very different meanings in some societies. Jylan delivered an enthusiastic opening speech about friendship, cooperation, and cultural understanding, completely missing the irony that he'd chosen a game fundamentally about bankrupting one's opponents through aggressive property acquisition. The first hour passed without major incident. There was some confusion about rules, a few translation issues, and some difficulty for certain species in handling the tiny game pieces, but these were expected challenges. It was during the second hour that things began to unravel. At table 3, a Ferengi diplomat was caught hiding property cards up his sleeve and attempting to charge other players for properties he didn't actually own. This is standard negotiation practice, the Ferengi protested when confronted. I'm engaging authentically with the human concept of creative capitalism. Meanwhile, at table 7, a heated argument had broken out between a Tellarite and an Andorian over a property transaction. What had begun as a simple purchase of Park Place had somehow evolved into a complex diplomatic negotiation involving water rights, defense treaties, and mutual non-aggression pacts. "You can't just buy Park Place," the Tellarite shouted, pounding his fist on the table. "It's strategically positioned to control access to the boardwalk corridor." "That's precisely why I need it," the Andorian countered, antennas rigid with tension. "Your control of the orange properties already threatens my supply lines." At table 1, a group of Tholians had abandoned the game entirely and were using the colorful paper money to create elaborate origami sculptures, believing this to be the actual point of the exercise. Perhaps most concerning was table 5, where a Gorn had landed on another player's hotel-laden property, couldn't pay the rent, and interpreted his bankruptcy as a form of ritual defeat. In keeping with Gorn tradition for honorable loss, he had begun a solemn ceremony to pledge lifelong servitude to the property owner, a very confused Balian who just wanted to continue playing the game. Jylan rushed from table to table, trying to explain that it's just a game and none of this is real. Concepts that proved surprisingly difficult to convey to species that approached all interactions with deadly seriousness. The Scrabble tournament the following day fared no better. The committee had attempted to accommodate linguistic diversity by creating a massive board with alphabets from all major Federation languages. This resulted in a playing surface nearly 6 meters across with over 10,000 letter tiles. The Vulcan delegation arrived with a 347-page statistical analysis of optimal word placement strategies. The Betazoids were accused of telepathically reading other players' tiles. A group of liquid-state beings had trouble keeping their letters from dissolving. And the universal translators struggled catastrophically with words that didn't exist in other languages, leading to nonsensical translations and heated arguments over word validity. One particularly contentious moment came when a Vulcan player placed a word that translated roughly to a logically perfect state of meditative clarity achieved through disciplined thought processes. When informed that the word wasn't in the official Scrabble dictionary, the Vulcan nearly experienced an emotion. "Your dictionary is incomplete and therefore illogical," the Vulcan stated with dangerous calm. "The word exists. I have just used it. Its exclusion renders this entire exercise invalid." Meanwhile, Species with nonlinear thought patterns or multiple simultaneous consciousness streams couldn't grasp why they couldn't spell words in multiple directions at once or why words couldn't intersect three-dimensionally. By mid-afternoon, the tournament had devolved into what an observer might charitably call freestyle Scrabble, with players essentially creating their own rules, languages, and in one case, an entirely new game involving throwing the letter tiles like confetti and making philosophical observations about their landing patterns. The sports events on day 3 brought their own unique disasters. The low-gravity volleyball tournament in Starbase 47's Recreation Dome had seemed like an inspired choice. The reduced gravity would accommodate species with different physical strengths, and the simple rules appeared universally comprehensible. What the committee failed to consider was how different anatomies would interact with a game designed for bipedal beings with 2 arms. Species with multiple limbs transformed the court into a chaotic web of appendages. Those with tentacles inadvertently trapped the ball in suction cup grips. Avian species instinctively attempted to nest in the net, and one unfortunate horda partially digested the ball when it made contact with its acidic outer membrane. The specially designed safe volleyball, made from supposedly indestructible materials, lasted precisely 7 minutes before being punctured by an enthusiastic Klingon spike. Its replacement fared even worse, disintegrating upon contact with a Breen player whose environmental suit emitted an unexpected cryogenic field. The match was briefly paused when a team of Balians executed a complex 27-step synchronized maneuver that left everyone, including the Balians themselves, thoroughly confused about what had just happened. The move was technically legal, but so incomprehensible that the referees needed a 20-minute conference to determine if it constituted a violation of the laws of physics, if not the rules of volleyball. The badminton tournament was canceled after just 40 minutes when it became apparent that several species could not distinguish between the shuttlecock and various small flying insects native to their worlds. This led to some participants attempting to swat actual living creatures, while others engaged in elaborate courtship displays toward the sports equipment. The handicrafts workshops on day 4 were supposed to provide a calmer, more focused cultural exchange. Knitting and pottery had been selected for their tactile, creative nature and seemingly universal appeal. The committee had arranged for skilled human instructors and high-quality materials suitable for a range of physiologies. The knitting workshop began with an optimistic introduction to the art of creating fabric by interlocking loops of yarn with 2 needles. For species with human-like hands, this proved challenging but achievable. For others, it became an exercise in creative problem-solving or outright impossibility. A Gorn ambassador snapped 17 pairs of needles before special reinforced ones could be fabricated. An Andorian became tangled in his own yarn to such an extent that emergency services had to be called. A group of gaseous beings attempted to manipulate the needles through telekinesis, resulting in a dangerous hurricane of flying metal sticks. One particularly memorable incident involved a Tholian who, unable to handle the needles conventionally, began secreting crystalline filaments and weaving them into intricate, geometrically perfect structures, technically not knitting, but so beautiful that the instructors didn't have the heart to correct him. Unfortunately, these crystal structures proved to be natural resonators that gradually amplified ambient sound to painful levels, eventually shattering all glass within 30 meters. The pottery workshop encountered similar challenges. Clay that was perfectly pliable for humans proved too rigid for some species and too loose for others. Several aquatic participants struggled with the concept of creating vessels to hold water when they lived surrounded by it. A Vulcan spent 3 hours creating a mathematically perfect sphere, then seemed genuinely confused about why this wasn't considered the obvious end goal of the exercise. A well-meaning Tellarite attempted to improve the traditional human pottery wheel by attaching a modified warp core regulator, resulting in a brief, localized time distortion that aged several clay pots of approximately 7,000 years in an instant. The resulting artifacts were actually quite impressive, though the temporal aftereffects caused everyone in the vicinity to experience Tuesday 3 times in a row. By the fifth day of the festival, attendance had dropped significantly, and the medical bay reported treating over 200 injuries ranging from minor yarn abrasions to severe clay inhalation. Nevertheless, Gillen remained determinedly optimistic about the final events: the interspecies marching band and community choir. Music, Gillen insisted to an increasingly skeptical planning committee, is the universal language. If anything can bridge our differences, it's harmony. What Gillen failed to consider was that harmony means vastly different things to different species, particularly those whose hearing ranges extend far beyond human perception in both directions. The marching band rehearsal began with the distribution of various brass, woodwind, and percussion instruments. This immediately presented problems, as many species simply couldn't interact with instruments designed for human physiology. How does a methane-breathing giant squid play a trumpet? How does a silicon-based crystalline entity with no lungs produce notes on a clarinet? Creative adaptations were attempted. A hordo was given a large bass drum to roll over, which worked until the drum's membrane dissolved on contact. An enthusiastic Andorian attempted to play two flutes simultaneously using both hands and antennae, creating a discordant wail that caused several more sensitive species to flee the room. The concept of marching while playing proved equally challenging. Species with radial symmetry couldn't grasp the idea of forward. Those with multiple legs created complex, contradictory patterns. Hovering species drifted at inconsistent heights, creating a three-dimensional chaos rather than neat rows. When the band finally attempted to play a simple human march, the result was described by one observer as sounding like industrial machinery experiencing catastrophic failure while falling down a staircase. The cacophony triggered emergency alarms, which many band members interpreted as a new rhythm to follow, further compounding the chaos. The community choir faced even greater hurdles. With vocal ranges spanning from subsonic rumbles to ultrasonic squeals, no single piece could accommodate all participants. The human concept of a key or tune proved bewilderingly restrictive to species that communicated in mathematical frequencies or pulsating color patterns. The chosen song, "We Are One Family," a simple human friendship anthem, contained lyrics that, when translated, ranged from nonsensical to deeply offensive. In Tellarite, the chorus roughly translated to a formal declaration of property rights over the listener's ancestral lands. In ancient Vulcan, it contained what appeared to be instructions for a ritual sacrifice. The choir director, a human with impressive patience, attempted to navigate these challenges by breaking the group into sections based on compatible vocal ranges. This created momentary harmony until the Andorian sopranos, naturally competitive, began trying to outperform the Tellarite baritones, leading to a volume war that culminated in the spectacular implosion of the rehearsal room's acoustic panels. The final performance never occurred. Instead, the choir rehearsal ended with a visiting Medusan accidentally projecting its emotions through its containment field, causing half the participants to experience a mystical revelation and the other half to develop temporary synesthesia. For weeks afterward, Federation officials reported tasting purple whenever anyone mentioned music. Human representatives, invited to observe these events, displayed a reaction that baffled the Federation observers. They laughed. Rather than being shocked or offended by the chaos, the humans seemed to find the situation strangely familiar and amusing. "You should see what happens at Earth Elementary School music recitals," one human diplomat commented with a chuckle. "This is actually pretty good for a first attempt." Another human helpfully suggested, "You're all overthinking it. Just have fun." This comment was dutifully translated into all Federation languages, resulting in various interpretations ranging from abandon all protocol and embrace chaos to experience joy through deliberate inefficiency. By the end of the week-long festival, the Committee for Cultural Integration and Exchange faced the daunting task of compiling an official report. Gillen, still clinging to optimism despite sporting several bandages and a slightly singed respiratory attachment, gathered his team around a conference table littered with broken game pieces, tangled yarn, and misshapen pottery. Perhaps He began hesitantly. We could frame this as a series of learning opportunities. The committee members stared back at him with expressions ranging from exhaustion to thinly veiled hostility. One Vulcan was still experiencing time hiccups from the pottery incident and kept briefly disappearing and reappearing 3 seconds in the past. The damage reports were substantial. 14 separate diplomatic incidents had been narrowly averted. 3 species had formally requested never to be seated near each other again. The starbase environmental systems were still struggling to filter out the unexpected compounds released during the pottery firing. And the medical bay had documented 17 previously unknown forms of allergic reactions, including one Andorian who now turned bright purple whenever exposed to knitting needles. The financial costs were equally concerning. Property damage, medical treatments, specialized equipment, and emergency containment procedures had depleted the committee's annual budget in just 1 week. The requisition form for replacement musical instruments alone ran to 12 pages. When Jylan presented a heavily sanitized version of these findings to the Federation Council, the reception was far from enthusiastic. Chancellor Zorp listened with a weary expression of someone who had seen it all before and had expected nothing less. The Andorian ambassador rose first when Jylan finished speaking. I move that monopoly be permanently classified as a form of economic warfare and banned under Section 31 of the Federation Peace Accords. The Vulcan representative followed. I propose that interspecies choir activities be categorized as a potential form of auditory torture requiring special containment protocols. The Ferengi delegate, seeing an opportunity, suggested that he could secure exclusive licensing rights to safety-modified versions of human games, with profits to be shared. Eventually, one by one, Federation representatives voiced their objections, concerns, and in some cases, formal protests. The once promising initiative was crumbling before Jylan's eyes. Chancellor Zorp finally raised a hand, silencing the growing discord. With measured words that carried the weight of someone who had witnessed far too many well-intentioned disasters, he addressed the council. The problem, Zorp stated, is not with the activities themselves, but with our approach. We attempted to mechanically transpose the recreational practices of one chaotic species onto a diverse and complex system without truly understanding their nature, or the nature of humans themselves. He turned to Jylan, his expression softening slightly. Your enthusiasm is commendable, but perhaps misplaced. The path to understanding does not always involve direct participation, particularly when dealing with a species as unique as humans. The Cultural Integration Initiative was indefinitely suspended. Jylan found himself reassigned to a significantly less prominent position in the Department of Extinct Species Documentation. The committee was disbanded, its members returning to their regular duties with a collection of unusual stories and, in some cases, persistent nightmares about flying knitting needles. In the months that followed, the Federation quietly revised its cultural integration policies. Instead of attempting to participate, they returned to their previous strategy of careful observation from a safe distance and letting humans do what humans do best, be unpredictably human. Exchange programs now focused on less interactive areas like theoretical mathematics or ancient history, where the risk of accidentally triggering an interstellar incident was significantly lower. Despite the initiative's failure, certain unexpected consequences lingered. A heavily modified, extremely complex, and remarkably boring safety-approved version of Monopoly became surprisingly popular among Federation bureaucrats, who found its tedious rules system and predictable outcomes soothing. Several avant-garde Federation musicians began experimenting with what they called chaos harmonics, inspired by the disastrous choir rehearsals. The resulting compositions were described as either migraine-inducing or transcendental, depending on one species and pain threshold. Souvenirs from the Recreational Exchange Week. Half-finished knitting projects, broken pottery shards, bent Scrabble tiles became ironic collector's items, displayed in certain diplomatic offices as conversation pieces or subtle warnings. In a private conversation months after the incident, Chancellor Zorp confessed to a trusted advisor that he had anticipated the initiative's failure from the beginning, but had allowed it to proceed as a practical lesson for those who were too optimistic about understanding humans. Some lessons, Zorp mused, can only be learned through experience, preferably someone else's experience, but sometimes one's own. The Federation ultimately accepted that trying to assimilate or participate in human culture in any systematic way was both impossible and dangerous. Human presence came to be regarded as an unpredictable natural force, like a cosmic weather phenomenon that needed to be monitored and prepared for, rather than controlled or engaged with directly. The incident became known informally among Federation staff as the recreational catastrophe, or sometimes Jyland's folly, though never in the presence of benzites. It joined a growing list of well-intentioned but disastrous attempts to bridge the gap between humans and the wider galactic community. Several years later, a human diplomat visited Chancellor Zorp, bringing a gift, a new Earth board game called Pandemic. Zorp examined the box with experienced eyes, noted the illustration of a disease-ravaged planet, and sighed deeply. The Federation might have stopped asking what was in the starter kit, but that didn't mean the surprises and potential regrets were over. They had simply learned to prepare for the inevitable, one small disaster at a time. As he placed the game on a high shelf in his office, safely behind reinforced glass, Zorp made a mental note to update the containment protocols for the next recreational exchange festival, which was already being planned by a new generation of optimistic diplomats who hadn't experienced the first one. History, after all, had a tendency to repeat itself, especially when humans were involved. The new initiative's name? Understanding through observation, a safe distance approach to human cultural appreciation. Zorp approved it immediately, with only one condition. All activities must take place at least 50 meters from any critical systems, preferably in a reinforced, soundproof chamber with excellent ventilation and multiple emergency exits. Sometimes, Zorp reflected, wisdom isn't about finding new solutions. It's about recognizing which problems cannot be solved, only contained. And humans, with their board games and choirs and inexplicable enthusiasm for creating chaos in the name of fun, were definitely a problem that could only be contained, never solved. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the true understanding of humanity came not from participating in their activities, but from accepting their fundamental unpredictability and finding a way to coexist with it anyway. As Zorp looked at the pandemic game one last time before leaving his office, he couldn't help but wonder what new chaos it would bring. Whatever it was, the Federation would endure it, document it, and add it to the ever-growing list of things they regretted asking about. After all, that was the true meaning of intergalactic cooperation, shared regret, mutual bewilderment, and the persistent hope that next time, against all evidence to the contrary, things might somehow go according to plan.